Hello students, today I'll begin with the explanation of Unit 1 of the essay Student Mobs by J.B. Priestley. So I'll start with Unit 1. Being a fair-minded man, I begin this piece by admitting that I may have some slight prejudice against students. So he says that as he's a fair-minded man, an impartial person, so before beginning with this essay, with this small piece of writing, he wants to confess one thing that the readers might find that he is a bit prejudiced against students. This is stronger on the negative than on the positive side. Now, this prejudice against students is more on the negative part than on the positive side. It is not that I dislike students as such. It is more that, unlike so many people remembering their youth, I don't regard student antics through a nostalgic haze. He says that it is not that he dislike students. It is just that unlike so many people who are so fond of their youth and their student life, and they get so nostalgic about it, he is not that fascinated with his youth or the student life. True, I was a student myself once, but then, by the time I went up to Cambridge in the Michaelmas term of 1919, I was a man, not an overgrown boy, already in my 26th year and a battered old soldier. Now he says that it is a fact that even I was a student once. But then he says that by the time he reached Cambridge University, and he was a grown up at that time, and in the Michaelmas term of 1919. Now, what is this term? It is an academic session beginning soon after Michaelmas, a festival celebrated on 29th September in the honor of an archangel, Michael. Okay, so he says that by that time he was a man and not an overgrown boy, and he was already in his 26th year and a battered old soldier. Why a battered old soldier? Because Priestley joined the university after a few years of compulsory military service during World War I. Therefore, he is considering himself as a battered old soldier. So he says that when he was in his student life and he was studying in Cambridge, he did not consider himself to be a boy anymore, or an overgrown boy rather, but he was a man because he was already 26 years old at that time, and he had already attended the services. He had rendered his services as a soldier during World War I. I wanted to get on with my life and not clown around with lads newly released from school and given their first checkbooks. So when he was a student of Cambridge, what was his thought process? At that time, he wanted to get on with his life. He wanted to move ahead in his life and not, clown around or loiter around like other boys, other lads who are newly released from the school and they enter the universities or colleges, and who are then considered to be a very grown up person, and they are handed over their checkbooks, their first checkbooks, so that they can manage their own expenses. So he was not that kind of a person at that age. I didn't see then and have never seen since why young men in universities, turning themselves into mischievous and sometimes dangerous mobs, should be treated indulgently, as if they were quite different from mobs of garage hands, apprentice fitters, bus drivers. Now he says that he failed to understand certain things when he was a student of Cambridge, and since then he had never been able to observe one fact, that why young men who are in universities, who are studying in universities and colleges, when they turn themselves into mischievous and dangerous mobs, why they should be treated so leniently. Indulgently means so leniently, as if these students, these student mobs, these students who were turning into dangerous mobs, were different from the mobs of the people who were working in garages, or the people who had learned the practice of fitting up things, or the bus drivers. How were the mobs of students different from the groups of people who were working at garages or as fitters or as bus drivers? So why were only the students treated so leniently? He failed to understand this thing earlier also, and even today he fails to understand that's why students are treated in such a manner, despite the fact that they sometimes turn into such dangerous mobs. Indeed, there is a case for more severity. Students are not supposed to be ignorant and stupid. Now he says that if students are turning into mobs, this is a serious issue. Why? Because students cannot be considered as ignorant people, stupid people who can be treated in any way, or who can be directed in any wrong direction. If they are, then they should be sent home and not receive higher education at public expense. Now he says that if the case is otherwise, that the students are ignorant and stupid when they reach the universities or colleges, then in that case they should be sent home and they are not liable to receive higher education at the cost of public expense. They are wasting not only their own but also the people's time, energy, and money. So they are not only wasting their own time, energy, and money, they are also wasting the time, energy, and money of people, their countrymen. There must be countries now in which peasants are going without substantial meals and some decent clothes, so that a lot of lads can spend several years in universities. Now he says that there are fair chances that in many of the countries, peasants, there must be a huge lot of peasants who must be devoid or must not be getting the substantial meals, and might not be getting some decent clothes to wear, because due to their hard work and labor, many of the boys are able to go to universities for several years. Such lads should begin to develop a sense of responsibility. So such students who are able to go to universities at the cost of the lives of so many peasants, they should now develop a sense of responsibility. They should be the last and not the first to create howling destructive mobs. So the students need to understand that at what cost they are studying in the universities, and if they get to realize this fact, then they should be the last one to form the destructive mobs and not the first one. They should be reading books, not burning them. So the students need to understand that it's their age to read books, not turning into mobs and burning the books. It is not the occasional rags that get out of hand I am thinking about now. He says that I am not talking about the shabby people, those handful of students, those shabby students. I am not thinking about them. It is the so called demonstrations. So he's talking about the students who are actually a part of the demonstrations. He says that it is the so called demonstrations that seem to make an appearance every few nights on the TV news. So he's not talking about the occasional drags, rather, he's talking about the students who are a part of the demonstrations, which we can see every few nights on the television. I do not care whose side they are supposed to be on. I am more and more depressed and revolted by these idiot processions with their banners and slogans and mindless grinning faces on their way to break windows, smash cars, burn furniture and books, terrify women and children, and to reduce international law, custom, and sensible usages to chaos. So he says that I do not care actually that for whom they are working, for whom they are demonstrating there. Uh, he is more and more depressed, and he's taken aback by the idiot processions with their banners and slogans and mindless grinning faces. So, whenever he is witnessing such processions and demonstrations, he is actually amazed to see these idiotic crowds of students who are grinning away, and they are marching ahead on the way to break windows, to break cars, smash cars, and burn furnitures and books, or to terrify women and children. And they reduce the international law, custom, and all the sensible usages to anarchy, to chaos, to nothingness. So he says that these students who are turning into destructive mobs, who are a part of the processions and demonstrations, they are into something that is useless, that is only meant to create chaos in the society. So he fails to understand the motive behind this. In many instances, of course, these demonstrations are anything but student improvisations, having been organized by governments on a secret rent a mob basis. So he says that in many cases, these demonstrations, these processions are not meant for student improvisations at any cost. Rather, he says that these demonstrations are majorly organized by governments on a secret rent a mob basis. What do governments do? Governments hire people, hire the students, hire the student mobs in order to carry out these demonstrations and processions. So these demonstrations and processions are not meant for student improvisations. Rather, these students are hired by the governments for the sake of their own political motives. Even where governments have apologized, it is hard to believe that the student mobs could not have been checked and dispersed before any real damage was done. So he says that even in those countries where governments have apologized for the damage caused by the student mobs, he says it is really difficult for him to believe that the student mobs could not have been checked or controlled or dispersed before they cause the real damage. So he says that it is in the hands of the government to control the student mobs, to stop them from causing public damages. And this is all part of the darkening picture. So he says that when we look at the present scenario and we observe the students turning into destructive mobs, this entire scenario is a part of a darkening picture of the real world. So in Unit 1, Priestley has talked about his prejudice against the students on the negative side rather than on the positive side. And he says that he is not fascinated by the student life anymore, or he does not remember his youth or student life with that charm as other people do. He's not nostalgic about it. Why? Because he says that students are no more concerned with their books or their studies, rather they are now turning into destructive mobs. And it is due to the political interests of the governments that the students are deviating, or the students are diverted towards these destructive works rather than pushing them into the academics or the career making fields. They are rather turned into destructive mobs for the political interests. So this entire scene of the students turning into destructive mobs is a part of a darkening picture of the real world of the contemporary era. So that's all for the explanation of Unit 1. Thank you.